Well, I've been given a brief glimpse into the future, and I gotta say that future's looking mighty bright. I'm referring to the upcoming release of Doom: The Dark Ages. Id Software's much anticipated follow-up to the awesome Doom Eternal from back in 2020, which honestly at this point seems like ancient history. Yeah, so recently I was invited to Bethesda's HQ in Sydney to play through a preview build for the Dark Ages, with there being a few different areas I got to check out, one of which I was allowed to even capture footage of. But first things first, I do need to mention that this isn't a sponsored video, at least not by id Software or Bethesda. I drove my car for an hour to get to their office, so I paid for my parking, I sat in the same room as everybody else did, I played the same demo, and then I drove home. And like I mentioned before, capture was pretty limited, so while some of the footage you're going to be watching is likely to be mine, some of it also isn't, instead being B-roll supplied to all of us. What is also worth mentioning is that I played on Nightmare difficulty because I've got like a stupid ego with this kind of thing and I just couldn't let myself play it otherwise. But still, like, overall my takeaway is that these guys are definitely sitting on another really solid shooter.
Someone cooked here.
People just looking for more Doom in the sense of being able to go around in the boots of every demon's worst nightmare are absolutely going to enjoy what id Software's cooking up here. But I also think it's safe to say that for some people this also might not gel. I'll try to explain why. So it's probably not any kind of secret anymore that The Dark Ages is actually a prequel to Doom 2016 and Eternal. I guess taking place sometime after the events in that original game, showing the rise of the Slayer as he becomes the last bastion of defense against this never-ending demonic threat. The overall premise seems to be that the Slayers kept on a literal leash by the makers, held in this weird sort of stasis mode on their ship, but then dropped into areas where they become totally overrun with demons and used as a sort of last resort, before he's then beamed back up again at the end of the mission and locked away. And it is a pretty cool concept, like they're letting this wild beast out of its cage, then throwing it back in again when the whole thing's over, which is something I'm sure is bound to end well. In fact, the story does seem to hint in that regard that he's slowly regaining back control, and there's even a cinematic where he temporarily seems to get his free will before he's locked down again. So I'm absolutely sure there's going to be a moment in there when he breaks free, so to speak, and goes on a rampage against anyone who gets in his way. For the time being, though, he just seems to be this blunt, destructive weapon being used by the makers, who really seem to have quite a lot of screen time overall here. And off the back of that, like, I did notice that there's definitely a very high focus on the cinematics, and I mean, even in the short demo I got to play through, a large chunk of it, by Doom standards anyway, was taken up by cutscenes, a lot of which don't even really involve the Slayer and focus instead around all these other side characters discussing tactics and different battle plans. And I mean, like, this might be a hot take, but I've never really cared all that much about the lore behind the demons and the makers and all that stuff. What interests me the most is what the Slayer's been up to. Like, what did the guy do after he left the Phobos base and ended up in hell during the events of the first game? Or, you know, at what point did he get that insane drip and land himself that dope fur cape? You know what I mean? That's the stuff I'm interested in. But when you've got all these weird alien-looking characters standing around looking like they're out of Destiny or Warframe where it looks like a different game entirely, it's kinda hard to not lose a bit of interest. At least, if nothing else, the whole thing does look pretty damn gorgeous, running on the new id Tech 8 engine, and yeah, I'm just so glad it's not UE5. But before I get too far into things, I do have to thank Nvidia for sponsoring this video. Now recently, along with Orbifold Studios, these guys have just released the demo for Half-Life 2 RTX, exemplifying the incredible power of the all-new, beyond fast GeForce RTX 50 series. With full ray tracing, handcrafted high-resolution textures, and new and enhanced high-poly models to capture the tone and look of the original, even including brand new weapon animations to go with it. The 50 series is actually the debut for the launch of Nvidia DLSS 4, a technique for creating all new frames with no compromise or sacrifice to a game's original image quality, allowing players to max out the most demanding titles. And what's also cool is that all of these new features, like the multi-frame generation, ray reconstruction and path tracing, are all going to be present in Doom: The Dark Ages. But even just seeing all of this stuff in Half-Life 2, I've got to say it's pretty wild. I mean, considering this thing is going on to be 20-something years old now, really making this whole project a pretty amazing overhaul. And seeing all of these new visual features, like the new lighting, the shadows and reflections, really adds even more immersion into something that was already pretty damn immersive and realistic. And I think at this rate as well that we're more likely to be playing this fully updated version of Half-Life 2 before we're ever going to see any kind of proper sequel from Valve. Either way, be sure to check out the free demo for this thing on Steam and see all this cool new stuff in action. And yeah, once again, thanks to Nvidia for sponsoring this video. The environments look great, the animations are smooth, and about the only thing I thought was a little bit odd is the heads-up display, with this weird holographic portrait thing for the Slayer which just seemed a little bit out of place. And yes, like I know that's supposed to be a reference to the original game's HUD, but it still looks a bit odd to me given the setting. It somehow feels like it has an art style sitting somewhere between 2016 and then Eternal, feeling a lot less cartoonish than Eternal was, but then not quite as gritty as 2016, which you'll notice when you've got dozens of slowly moving projectiles floating around the screen. Because in case it wasn't obvious here, one of the main influences is the whole bullet hell genre. The music also sounded pretty awesome. I mean, the few tracks I could actually hear. And while I doubt it's going to stack up to the stuff that old mate Mick Gordon worked on in the past, it's still the kind of music that when you hear it during combat, it does a great job of amping you up even more. On another positive note, and perhaps the most important one, when you're in the game itself, that is running around ripping and tearing, all this stuff takes a back seat. And where it matters the most, this is still the Doom we all know and love. Now, the first thing I noticed when I finally got control was that this is a much slower game than Doom Eternal was. Not in the sense of it being glacial, but there is a feeling that you're more of a lumbering brute this time around. Overall, it just feels like a lot heavier, and that whole thudding rhythm to running around and jumping actually reminded me a lot as playing as a 40k Space Marine. There is jumping and sprinting, however, there's no dash move anymore, and jump pads seem to be pretty rare as well. So you're not going to be pulling off these crazy acrobatics as you fly around the arenas with the meat hook or anything like that. In terms of the weapons, there is a bit of a sense too that they're trying to make sure that this arsenal doesn't just feel like a reskin of what we had in Doom Eternal. So the first weapon you get your hands on is yet again the shotgun, which is still just outright replacing any kind of pistol. And again, this thing is really handy at dealing with the fodder enemies, but can also be really good against the tougher demons, as it now comes with an upgrade that gives it a burst fire mode and also lights enemies on fire, creating this constant stream of armor shards to keep you topped up. Later in the demo, we also got the super shotgun, and the biggest change I noticed with this one is that the firing and the reload speed is a lot slower, to the point that it almost feels like it's half what it was in Doom Eternal. And that meat hook is also gone as well, all to probably try to make the weapon less of a crutch during combat. Now, the next couple of weapons were the ones that I found myself using the least, with one of these being what's more or less like a variant of the heavy cannon, and then another one which is kind of like a stake gun, I guess, firing out these steel bolts. Yeah, I guess someone at id Software played Painkiller a bit too much. And they're fine. I mean, there's nothing really wrong with either of them, but I just could never really find an instance where they were more useful than anything else. In terms of shredding through crowds of the fodder demons, the other automatic weapon, the Skull Crusher, is hands down way more effective. Now, this is that super awesome looking gun which they showed off, which got a lot of popularity online, that uses crushed skulls as an ammo source, then firing the shards out in more or less like a 180-degree arc in front of the player. Which is not only metal as fuck, but it also just seems to disintegrate more or less anything that gets in front of you. As for the whole stake gun thing, well, this one does decent damage, but then again, so does the burst fire shotgun, which also has the bonus of giving me armor shards. Apart from that, there's two variants of the plasma rifle, and yeah, this thing's back again, and this time you've got two options. Either a simple, single firing version, or instead one with two barrels, which has an upgrade that lets it shock enemies and even stun them. And I'd say that this thing was probably my favourite weapon in the entire playthrough, because I mean, it's really hard to come up with any kind of fault for a dual barrel plasma rifle. And yeah, I'm sure there's been some kind of mod or weapons pack out there for the original Doom that's let people do this for over a decade, but goddamn son, if it isn't nice to see something like this in an official release. What's also kind of clever too is that all these different weapon variants share the same slot, kind of like swapping out to mods worked in Doom Eternal. So that means that the shotgun and the super shotgun are on the same slot, for instance, whereas the machine gun and that state gun also share one as well. The final weapon I used is something I'm not even sure I'm allowed to talk about, but it was this one that I found in a secret area called the Reaper Chain Shot. Now this thing seems to fire out a ball and chain, almost like a melee weapon, just with more range, which dealt with the weak demons pretty easily, but also seemed to do lots of damage to the tougher ones. Having said that though, it's pretty hard to give anything other than a surface level assessment here for all these guns. I mean, considering we really didn't get that much time with all of them to figure out which ones were best. I mean, it didn't take all that long for people to figure out all the best tricks and combos with the various weapons in Doom Eternal, and all the stuff about how they worked against each enemy, so I'm sure that's going to happen here as well. But in the case of this preview where I played the game for like 4 hours, I mean, it's kind of like teaching someone the basics of how to play chess, only to then have them play their first match against a grandmaster. Overall though, I'd say that combat is awesome, but it definitely feels slower than it did in Doom Eternal. And another one of the main reasons for that is that the whole fast weapon swapping thing seems to have been completely done away with as well. Yeah, that means no more firing with the super shotgun, then swapping to the ballista, and then the rocket launcher, and then back to the shotgun, or any of that kind of crap. I mean, the weapon swap speed in this thing is slow, as in almost as slow as the original game. And you more or less have to really pick a weapon depending on the situation and then stick with it. All of which, again, I'm guessing has been done in response to the criticism that some people had over the combat in Doom Eternal. Maybe later in the game there'll be an upgrade that allows for faster weapon swapping, but to be honest, I'd be surprised if there was, considering this is just another factor that makes it seem like they're really trying to differentiate things as much as they can. Which honestly I don't really have an issue with. I mean, if you think about it, every single main game in the Doom series has always been vastly different. I mean, look at the gameplay differences between Doom 1 and 2 and then Doom 3 for instance, and then what they did again with Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. The Dark Ages just seems like yet another cog in that never-ending machine. Just taking the basics of what its predecessor did with the whole resource management thing, but then also finding a way to make it seem unique, by really limiting and slowing down the movement options and making the combat feel a lot more grounded. So if the Slayer in Eternal was a roided up panther, well, then the Slayer in the Dark Ages is a German tiger tank. Even the enemies seem to move much slower now, like the bigger imps for instance, just kinda stand there charging up their attacks for what honestly feels like literal seconds. There's a new variant of what looks like a cyber demon with massive gargoyle wings and a chain gun for an arm, an enemy which kicked my fucking ass by the way. And even this thing just kinda skulks around the arena like a slowly moving turret. And again, like the same thing with the Mancubus, these guys more or less seem to plant themselves in one spot and then just keep firing at you. All of which seems to be by design because this intentional lack of fast movement and evasion options is really forcing you to use one thing. That being the real big game changer that they've added into the Dark Ages, and that's the mechanic of the shield that the Slayer now carries around. And another thing just really making me wonder if this was originally supposed to be a Quake reboot. Anyway, early on in the game you find the shield, and then from that point on it has 3 main uses. The first one is to simply block incoming attacks, but then if you can also block it just the right time, you'll instead parry, and then send the projectile back to its sender. And this is a downright essential mechanic, because keeping in line with the whole bullet hell theme they've got going on here with the combat, these projectiles will outright home in on you at all times. So you really have to use the shield here, or else you'll take more damage than Grum's reputation did the time he got ratioed by that Assassin's Creed account on Twitter. Now the second use for the shield is an outright overpowered charge move, where you can lock onto an enemy and then launch into them for massive damage, which has the handy benefit of stunning the bigger demons, but then also just outright vaporizing the fodder ones. Then finally, it has an even arguably more useful feature where you can throw it out and it's going to lodge itself into the tougher demons, stunning them as it spins around and shreds in place, leaving them wide open to more attacks. And then in the case of the fodder enemies, it's just going to outright slice them into pieces like they're a week old moldy carrot going through a cheese grater. This all kind of ties into the basics of getting your resources back, which is largely still unchanged. so lighting enemies on fire is again going to cause them to drop armor shards, and the main method of doing this seems to come from the shotgun, which has that super handy upgrade that not only burst fires but also ignites enemies at the same time. It does also seem a bit like they're trying to downplay the whole glory kill thing this time, and while there is still the option in there to do this and get some health back from the enemies, the opportunity seems to arise far less, or at least as far as I could tell during my playthrough. Which, yeah, yet again, I think is something they've probably done in response to all of the backlash that some people had from Doom Eternal, where the premise of having to watch a 2-second long animation of the Slayer killing something to regain their health was taken as some kind of personal affront. Now, what glory kills I did see in the Dark Ages seem pretty cool, but it's also hard to not be a little bit underwhelmed by this stuff at this point. Like, if you just consider how creative some of the glory kills were in Doom Eternal, like some of the ones with the Cacodemon for instance, anything that comes after that, no matter how good it is going to come across as anticlimactic. What's also really cool too is the way that enemy armor works, and unlike Doom Eternal, you can't simply shoot away the armor pieces or the weapons off enemies anymore. Now what you got to do instead is heat their armor up by hitting them with your weapons over and over, and then when that armor's red hot, smacking it with the shield is going to cause it to shatter. In the case of the fodder enemies armed with their own shields, this move also causes all of them to shatter at once, giving you back much needed armor shards as well. Not to mention having an incredibly satisfying ASMR component to it. And then the final thing that's been massively overhauled is how the melee works, with melee attacks now actually doing damage, which, yes, yet again seems to be a direct response to the criticism around Doom Eternal. So for starters, the whole blood punch thing is completely gone, and now instead your melee attacks work off a cooldown, with you able to do up to 3 hits back to back for a powerful combo, which even causes enemies to drop ammo with each hit. Oh yeah, because in case I forgot to mention, the chainsaw is also gone. And during the later parts of the preview, the fist gets replaced with a flail, keeping with the whole medieval theme they've got going on. And the concept is that the flail is a lot slower than your fist, but does more damage. But seeing as the melee seems to stun lock enemies anyway when you're bashing them in the face, I can't see why you'd not go for damage every single time. Again, like with the weapons though, I mean, there's not really all that much I can say about the moves given the limited time I got to spend with this thing. I will say though that early on, I definitely struggled a little bit getting the hang of things, which probably wasn't helping either that I played on Nightmare difficulty. But by the end of the day, I'd say during the last hour or so, I was finally getting back into that groove and where things were starting to click. So it's definitely going to be that same kind of experience where once you're locked into the fun zone, you're fully locked in. And I can see this campaign absolutely eating up my spare time and making my family members concerned for my well-being. The only thing I really wasn't vibing with was all of these sections where you're flying around on the Slayer's pet dragon thing. And there's this really tedious mechanic during these sections where you have to take out these 3 demonic ships from the inside. But before you can even land safely on each one of these ships, you've first got to destroy the turrets defending it from the outside. And this is just this very boring process where you sort of lock onto these things and then have to dodge these humongous, obnoxious projectiles by dashing in different directions. And during all of this, the controls just outright lock you into place, where about all you can do is just dodge and fire back. Then after performing a perfect dodge, you get increased damage and can quickly finish these things off. And it's all just this really mundane, straightforward stuff that you have to do over and over with each of these ships. I think the worst thing about it though is that it just doesn't feel like Doom at this point. It kind of reminds me of Turok Evolution, where they shoehorned in a similar segment where you were suddenly controlling this similarly flying creature and had to quickly come to grips with the controls. In fact, at one point during the Dark Ages, there was a section where you need to go through these tight passages and avoid colliding into the walls or else you're going to get killed, which was something that Turok Evolution did as well. And again here for the same stupid reason, you're unable to stop moving, which means if you make a wrong turn, you end up fucking pancaking into the wall. I don't know, it's like the only thought I had in my head the entire time I was controlling this dragon is that I just wanted to go back to being on foot and shooting things. And I get that they felt they needed to include something to mix up the ground combat so it didn't all get repetitive, but really these sections just have the illusion of being open-ended for the player, when in reality, the whole thing is still completely linear. And you have to do all of these smaller areas to progress onward, controlling this giant creature that feels like something out of Panzer Dragoon. I will say though that the visual of this thing is absolutely gnarly. It's got these weird sort of cybernetic wings, and the spectacle you get when it lands or picks you up for takeoff honestly looks like something from a death metal album cover. Still though, I'm really hoping that in the final version, this stuff makes up the least of the content. Oh yeah, and I should say as well that amazingly, somehow I managed to miss this part of the preview event that lets you hop into that massive giant mech suit and go around fighting demons the size of skyscrapers. But in a weird way, I'm almost kinda glad I missed it. I mean, even if it is due to my own stupidity, because if nothing else, it leaves something interesting for me when I finally check out the full game. The final section we got to play was the best bit anyway. Now this was a so-called siege map, which was this way more opened up and larger environment, where you're given a task to destroy a bunch of artillery cannons as your main objective. However, you're also given the option to choose which order you can do it in. Only this time, there is actually a purpose to exploring, with there being various secret areas and even that secret weapon hidden away that I came across. At one point I came up against this weird metallic spider thing, kinda looking like the vagary from Doom 3, which again, absolutely kicked my ass a bunch of times. And after a few attempts, I finally managed to kill it, only to then discover that for all my troubles, I got absolutely nothing. And I'm sure in the final build, there's gonna be a reward or some kind of incentive to kill this thing. But even as it is, it really shows you how populated the map is with all this extra content for the player to find. Just kind of feels like once again, they're giving you all the tools of the trade, the keys to the toy box, and then just dropping you into this metaphorical sandbox and letting you play, which is a good thing. Overall, I'm still not quite sure what to say about the Dark Ages, because it is hard to fully come to grips with something, especially a game like this, in such a short time period. I do think there's going to be a bunch of people unhappy that they simply won't be able to just fall back into their old habits with this one, but then on the flip side, like I'm sure the other folks are going to relish a game that shakes things up again. And like I said earlier, if you think about it, pretty much every mainline Doom game has always made some kind of significant change to the overall gameplay loop. Even Doom 2, which a lot of people seem to dislike for some reason, by simply adding in the super shotgun and a handful of new enemies, massively changed how it played compared to the first one. Not to mention that some of those demons, like the Revenant, the Archvile, and the Mancubus, have now become the series' most iconic enemies. And it seems that the Dark Ages is once again going to be doing the same thing. This is Doom. Maybe not the same Doom we knew from 5 years ago, but still Doom in its most purest form. I mean, look, like I'm not gonna lie, I wish we got a Quake reboot instead, or even something related to Heretic or Hexen. But at the end of the day, when Hugo and Marty are at the helm of a Doom project, it's a pretty damn safe bet that they're gonna be cooking.
You're goddamn right.
And either way, I'm still gonna be there on day one, at a front row seat with a big tub of buttered popcorn and a greasy, half-live chicken leg.